Arthur Pendelton, Nobel laureate in astrophysics, stared at the stream of data sent back from the James Webb Space Telescope and uttered exactly 4 words. They were 4 words that, from the moment he spoke them, no one in the cosmological community could publicly refute. This is not our universe, which was not a metaphor, nor a philosophical provocation, but a stark declaration about the data, about what the telescope had truly found as it cast its gaze into the deep cosmos further than any machine built by human hands had ever reached. Following that earth-shattering confession was an eerie silence that enveloped the entire scientific community. No press conferences were held to refute it, and no emergency efforts were made to justify or blame the machinery, because everyone profoundly understood the unspeakable weight of this man's words. Arthur Pendelton was not a malicious outsider trying to tear things down. He was the great master builder who had personally laid the sturdiest bricks to construct the framework of the so-called Standard Model, and now he had become the very person to confirm that this magnificent structure had shattered. When the chief engineer, the man who staked his honor to sign the safety certificate for the building's foundation, quietly stands on the porch and announces that the structural integrity has failed, it is no longer a mere scientific critique, but a confession brimming with existential dread. For decades, the elite had placed absolute faith in their system of lenses, but in the moment of facing these nakedly exposed truths, not a single person made the slightest attempt to bring out their toolbox to fix technical errors or recalibrate the lenses, because deep down they knew clearly that the data being displayed was perfect and undeniable. That colossal machine suspended out there in space was not deceiving anyone, it was simply fulfilling its duty as a still, flat mirror, reflecting a vast reality that the human brain was never prepared to absorb. The problem now did not lie in microscopic margins of error at the edges of a hypothesis, but rather it was carving a massive void into the very core foundation of all understanding, where laws once thought to be eternal were silently fading away. The collapse of a heavily fortified belief system usually begins with just such a silence, without any deafening explosions, only the faint echo of prejudices slowly crumbling from within, gently lifting the veil of the illusion of absolute control that our minds have always desperately clung to. From the endless, vast void where distant galaxies are quietly tearing apart the equations of physics, let us gently zoom out and return to a much closer, yet equally turbulent space, which is the inner landscape of each and every one of us. Just as Arthur Pendelton and his colleagues poured their hearts and souls into molding a standard model for the universe, where every fundamental particle and every constant had to obediently fit into preordained squares, we too are relentlessly building a standard model for our own lives. We carefully draft a flawless roadmap, establishing immutable axioms that we must reach the pinnacle of our careers by the time we turn 30 years old. We must possess a flawlessly peaceful home, and above all, we must maintain an attitude of perpetual, radiant positivity despite any storms. We deceive ourselves that simply by strictly adhering to those societal constants, life will operate smoothly like a finely tuned mechanical watch. And yet, on some ordinary day, when a tsunami of exhaustion unexpectedly strikes, when the internal fractures begin to bleed, we are stunned to realize that the actual data coming back does not match the glittering model we once worshipped. Terrible emotions, overwhelming emptiness, and the suffocating impasses in our chests burst open, shattering the artificial expectations the mind worked so hard to maintain. Our soul is like a telescope peering deep into the dark corners of consciousness and sending back profoundly alien images, murky patches of darkness that cannot be explained by ordinary, linear thinking. We panic and scramble for every tool from the self-help industry, desperately trying to twist and force our genuine emotions to fit back into a broken mold, exactly like how incompetent scientists intentionally ignore the margins of error to protect a rotten hypothesis. We torture ourselves for failing to be happy, we condemn ourselves for daring to feel tired, without realizing that the very stubbornness of clinging to an outdated worldview is the root of all repressed suffering. We fear change because we mistakenly believe that losing those old definitions means losing our very selves. Right at that breathtakingly precarious moment, the most miraculous first aid does not come from denying the pain or pasting empty words of encouragement over it, but from having the courage to look straight at the truth, just like the seasoned scientist standing before the stream of data echoing back from the abyss. Allow yourself to gently utter that this is no longer me, and say it with absolute serenity, without a trace of judgment or bitterness mixed in. Acknowledging that an old version of yourself is no longer capable of containing the new reality is not a shameful failure. Consider it the shedding of a cramped shell that has held you back for so long. The collapse of a worldview once bound to your flesh and blood is never a death, but in truth, it is the ringing bell signaling the first step into the realm of genuine freedom. When you stop supplying energy to maintain a delusional ego, when you accept letting go of rigid linear expectations, burdens weighing thousands of pounds will automatically fall away. Profound peace does not come from possessing a flawless map, but it blossoms from the moment you smile and tear up the map that led you astray, allowing yourself to sink into the magical uncertainty of the present. You realize that you do not need to be an unchanging constant in a universe that is endlessly fluctuating. You have the right to shatter, the right to doubt, and the right to freely recreate new definitions of yourself, because only when the castle of illusions completely crumbles and the fog dissipates can you look up and fully witness the majesty of the life force flowing freely within you. While we are struggling to pick up the pieces of our newly collapsed ego and learning how to let go of absolute expectations, not far away, at a quiet research institute in Baltimore, another mind is also undergoing its own cognitive earthquake. Sarah Jenkins, a young observational astronomer, sits trembling before her glowing computer screen in the dead of night. The spectral data laid out before her eyes exposes a truth so defiant that it forces ancient laws of physics to bow their heads, which is the magnificent presence of 6 massive galaxies. These colossal structures not only possess macroscopic mass but are also filled with complex, mature chemical elements, calmly existing in a distant era of the early universe, an epoch when, according to the strictest calculations of the Standard Model, they were absolutely not yet allowed to be born. This chilling discovery thrusts cosmology into a cruel paradox, illogical to the extreme, exactly like an archaeologist digging deep into the primordial earth and suddenly finding a massive, intact library containing millions of exquisitely leather-bound books, proudly existing in an era before humanity had even invented the first alphabet. Cosmic time has always been assumed to be a strictly linear flow, where all things must obediently line up and wait their turn to evolve from monotonous hydrogen clouds into complex celestial bodies, but those 6 defiant galaxies nonchalantly tore up that restrictive timetable. They stood there, proud and complete, bypassing the entire agonizingly long gestation process that the theory of cause and effect had imposed. For a scientist who always placed absolute trust in a cosmic clock like Sarah, witnessing with her own eyes the fulfilling conclusion of a story audaciously appearing before the prologue could even be written was indeed the ultimate mockery of the human brain's desperate need to control and categorize reality. Through the wide, awestruck, and stunned eyes of the young woman, we dimly perceive a sharp truth that growth does not necessarily have to be an obedient straight line yielding to the erosion of years, and there are majestic existences that carry within themselves a serene completeness without needing to wait for the permission of any clock measuring time. The proud presence of those 6 massive celestial realms suspended out there is not merely a fatal tear on the macroscopic map of physics, but it gently strips away a bitter illusion that our minds have always imprisoned ourselves within, which is the crushing pressure from the invisible trap known as the social clock. From the moment we are born, each of us is unconsciously stuffed into a merciless blueprint of time, a strict casting schedule demanding that we reap brilliant achievements in our 20s, establish a flawless foundation when we cross the threshold of 30, and reach the pinnacle of fulfillment in our prime years. We frantically race against the lifeless hands of the clock, sliding into suffocating anxiety simply because we feel we have not quite reached the milestones of success commensurate with the age printed on our documents, or sometimes more painfully, we are forced to brace ourselves and carry the bone-deep exhaustion of an entire lifetime of hardships within a body that is still in its tender 20s. The judgment of that social clock ravages our souls without mercy, forcing the natural flow of life to squeeze through a narrow funnel of binding prejudices, turning every present moment of living into a temporary transit station aimed toward some hazy, glorious future. However, amidst the panic of those terrified of falling behind, the wise philosopher Alan Watts once smiled and left behind a profoundly healing message, a soothing first aid for the mind, stating that in truth, this life is a wondrously melodic piece of music and absolutely not a breathless sprint to the finish line. When you enjoy a symphony, you never hurriedly fast forward to wait for the final note to sound and then smugly declare that you have won, because if the purpose of music were merely to reach the end, then the greatest conductors would surely be the ones waving their batons to make the orchestra play as fast as possible. The complete meaning of music lies right in the act of you passionately dancing with every melody resonating in the very present moment, relaxing your mind to drift along with the rise and fall of each rhythm instead of worrying about the choruses yet to come. We suffer because we have turned our entire vibrant journey into a series of dry tasks, where every passing day is merely a bullet point to be deleted so we can quickly reach for the next distant milestone, causing the present to always be demoted to an inferior means serving a future that never truly arrives. Just like gazing upon Sarah Jenkins' 6 shimmering stellar kingdoms, if the vast and majestic universe itself is free to birth galaxies ahead of their time, nonchalantly tearing up and breaking all artificial timelines to materialize perfectly, then why must you bitterly punish yourself just because of a vague feeling that you are delayed or out of step with the standards of the crowd? Life has never been a progress report needing to be stamped and approved by time, but rather it is a natural unfolding, blossoming, and bearing fruit according to the unique seasons of each soul. There are flower buds that burst open brilliantly at the radiant dawn, but there are also quiet night-blooming cereus flowers that only deign to release their fragrance when the thick night envelopes them, and there is no wrong time in the graceful blueprint of nature. You are not late at all, nor have you taken the wrong path. You are simply operating according to the time frame of your own soul, a uniquely original current that cannot be boxed in or weighed and measured by the lifeless division marks of society. Letting go of the need to compare every single step with others, refusing to be chained to the countdown clock of foreign expectations, is exactly the moment you relax your tense shoulders, allowing yourself to take a deep breath, gently removing the burdens of an unformed past and the illusions of an unreached future, to leisurely harmonize once again with the endless symphony of the present. You will suddenly realize a quiet comfort from deep within your consciousness, that right in this moment, in this very place, with all your beautiful incompleteness and chaos, you have always been whole and enough, calmly existing in perfection just as the great cosmos out there freely built those shimmering stars beyond all frameworks of measurement. From the inner stillness upon shaking off the shackles of linear time, let us continue our journey by turning our gaze toward the sunny shores of California, where another brilliant mind is being violently torn apart by the very desire to shackle all things with absolute, precise measurement. Dr. Elias Vance, an extremely meticulous cosmic measurement expert heavily obsessed with perfection, is sinking deep into a persistent nightmare known as the Hubble tension. In a monumental effort to determine the expansion rate of all things, the scientific community took the trouble to use 2 of the most independent and sophisticated measurement methods ever created by humanity. One method diligently measures from the primordial thermoluminescent remnants of the early universe, while the other calculates based on the brilliant light of stars twinkling in the present moment. 2 groups of dedicated experts, using 2 flawless equipment systems without a single scratch, both turned their eyes toward a single cosmic river to painstakingly measure the distance from upstream to downstream. However, when the final numbers were placed on the scale, they audaciously differed from each other by a full 9%. 9% might seem like a trivial little number to the minds of mortal flesh and blood, but in the harsh kingdom of cosmological precision, it is a yawning abyss deep enough to swallow all reasoning and shatter all life's work. Faced with this monstrous discrepancy, the first reflex of cold, analytical minds like Elias was to hastily drag out every kind of ruler to recalibrate, for they always blindly believed that there must surely be a loose screw somewhere or a miscalculated algorithm. They did everything over from the beginning, rebuilding distance scales, altering light variables, scrutinizing every tiny speck across thousands of terabytes of data with a breathtaking fanaticism. But ironically, the more carefully they measured, the more they magnified their lenses, the larger and sharper that crack swelled. The cruelest paradox striking Elias' mind did not lie in the fact that one of the two rulers was broken, but rather that both machines were entirely whole, perfectly accurate within their own internal logic systems, yet calmly painting two completely different realities that could not simultaneously exist. The smooth cosmic picture was now torn into two irreconcilable halves, leaving the pitiful doctor bowing his head before the cold strings of numbers, vaguely realizing a terrifying truth that perhaps their artificial tools were not broken, but the reality out there itself was refusing to be forced into a unified framework of measurement, fracturing into currents that mocked the shallow intellect of humanity. Dr. Elias Vance's utter impasse before cosmological rulers is precisely the perfect mirror reflecting a chronic illness that gnaws at the modern human soul day and night, which is the endless obsession with overthinking. In our fragile inner world, we are also splitting ourselves apart as we constantly measure our own worth using two utterly contradictory yardsticks. On one side, the glaring metrics from the expectations of the external environment and society, and on the other, the roaring cries of our soul's deep yearning for freedom. We desperately bring the objective standards of the crowd to impose upon a soul that possesses a naturally subjective and wild essence, only to panic when the two returned results can never align. Just like the stubborn scientists twisting every screw of the astronomical machine, we plunge into the endless loop of rumination. Dissecting every fragment of memory, agonizing over every decision, mistakenly believing that if we just dig a little deeper, analyze the right and wrong a little more clearly, a perfect truth will reveal itself. But the truth is, the more we try to use the lens of logic to distinguish right from wrong, the more our minds go mad and become deeply stuck in the quagmire of torment. Extreme exhaustion strikes not because we lack understanding, but because we have drained our life force in a desperate attempt to reconcile two realities that were inherently not born to be unified. Right at that very suffocating moment, the most purifying dose of first aid does not come from continuing to sharpen even keener analytical tools, but from an action entirely contrary to the ego's survival instinct. Which is the brave choice to stop believing in the measuring tapes. We must humbly recognize a cold truth that the mind cannot heal itself using the very rigid patterns of thinking that made it sick in the first place. Just as you cannot flatten a turbulent lake by violently slapping the water with your hands, you simply need to step back and let the lake find its way back to its inherent stillness. Sometimes, the truest and most enduring serenity blossoms from the very moment you smile and let go of the toxic need to thoroughly understand everything, gently accepting the contradictions existing within you as a natural essence of life. When you stop tearing yourself apart between opposing expectations, when you stop demanding your soul to fit into some lifeless quantitative mold, you will realize that peace does not lie in finding an absolute answer, but in the courage to let go and live fully alongside the questions that remain unanswered. Just as we have learned to let go of the mind's desperate rulers to embrace tranquil impermanence, on another distant macroscopic plane, the universe itself seems to be smiling, confirming that harsh truth through a violent earthquake known as the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument Project. For many grueling years, an alliance of hundreds of the greatest scientific minds took the trouble to map out a detailed three-dimensional chart of 6 million galaxies, sweeping across vast stretches of space throughout the history of the cosmos, just to find final validation for the cosmological constant. Ever since the genius scientist Albert Einstein carefully placed it into his equation, dark energy, or the lambda constant, has always been presumed to be the eternal anchor, the invisible static repulsive force reigning in the vacuum, the entity holding the ultimate power over life and death that determines the final fate of all things. The entire field of modern cosmology confidently built a magnificent tower of theory upon the ironclad belief that this number is inviolable, that dark energy will forever maintain a single intensity until the very end of time. The elite relied on that anchor to outline the finale of all creation, certain that they held the script of the final decay entirely in their hands, even if it were to occur in an infinitely distant future. And yet, when mountains of massive data from that sky-scanning project began pouring in and were decoded, a cold, earth-shattering truth emerged from the numbers, striking a fatal blow to the pride of human intellect. The great constant, the sturdiest pillar maintaining the order of the entire system of reality, turned out not to be unchanging at all. It is drifting. The data exposed a terrifying reality that dark energy is actually dynamic, its intensity fluctuating and mutating along the length of cosmic eras, sometimes surging powerfully, other times weakening and exhausted like the beat of a living heart rather than a lifeless stone. Try to imagine the sheer terror of a seasoned sea captain who carefully charted a course across the ocean based on a supposedly flawless compass, only to suddenly realize in a pitch-black night that the very magnetic pole of the Earth is constantly shifting away from its original position. Or the stunned feeling of a great engineer calculating the lifespan of a massive steel bridge based on a fixed tensile strength, only to discover that the physical nature of that metal block is silently transforming day by day in ways that no textbook has ever mentioned. The most unshakable variable, the ultimate foundation, seemingly the only cornerstone for humanity to cling to in hopes of finding a shred of safety and control amidst the absolute void, has now revealed its true form as the most precarious and unpredictable character in the entire script. This discovery is not merely a flawed math problem that needs to be erased and rewritten, but it robs the foundational laws of their eternity, turning all mathematical prophecies about the apocalypse of the universe into flimsy sketches written on rushing waters. The brilliant foundation that scientists, including pioneers like Arthur Pendelton, proudly stood upon to cast their gaze out into the world, is actually a melting iceberg silently drifting aimlessly across a chaotic ocean, creating the most spectacular and ironic proof that all things, from the microscopic world of the mind to the macroscopic realm of the stars, firmly refuse to be imprisoned by the word eternal. The drift of this grand constant is like a meaningful wink from the Creator, reminding us that even the vast universe refuses to freeze itself into a fossilized entity. It chooses to be vibrant, to change, and to endlessly recreate its own laws right on the runway of ceaseless evolution. That the collapse of the great cosmological constant known as dark energy is not only a mathematical disaster for the astronomical community, but also a giant mirror directly reflecting one of the most stubborn illusions of a human mind, which is the blind faith in a fixed self. The modern self-help industry has stuffed into our heads an invisible yet heavily pressuring mandate that everyone must set out to find themselves, as if hidden beneath societal shells is an original core, an immutable stone carving out our true personality from the moment of birth. We imprison ourselves in narrow definitions of character, proudly declaring that I am this kind of person or I would never do that thing, only to strip ourselves of the right to grow. However, if even the most wondrous foundation of space and time, the very power supporting billions of galaxies, is still calmly drifting and endlessly recreating itself, then why do you cruelly force the life flow of your own being to freeze into a fossilized entity? The concept of non-self in Eastern wisdom is by no means a pessimistic denial of existence, but in truth, it is a joyous invitation to enter the dance of absolute fluidity. It reminds us that the ego is not a rigid noun for us to fiercely protect, but an endlessly continuing verb. The suffering and exhausting depletion you bear stem largely from using your last ounce of strength trying to maintain an image, a role that deep down you no longer wish to play. The most purifying first aid for the soul at this moment is precisely the act of untying yourself from the shadow of the past. Embrace the sweet liberation of fluidity. Allow yourself the right to change a perspective you once defended to the end, the right to peacefully turn your back on a youthful dream that has now become a burden, and throw away the masks that, though they once fit perfectly, now leave you suffocating. You owe no one an eternally consistent version of yourself. Bravely letting the old ego drift into the void is the only way you can continuously be reborn in every new heartbeat of the impermanent universe. Just as we bravely let go of the illusion of a solid ego to merge with the endless flow of life, the universe once again tests the limits of human understanding with a mystery far deeper and more defiant. Let us momentarily turn our eyes away from the drifting constants to contemplate another foundational architecture where the world of physics stands paralyzed before the life and death game of 26 invisible locks. Hidden beneath the messy surface of naked reality are 26 core physical constants, the most primordial conventions dictating the strength of gravity, the mass of charged particles, or the radiant speed of light. What is terrifyingly astonishing welling up in the chests of researchers lies not in the obvious existence of the laws, but in the fine-tuning that is so perfect it exhausts all descriptive language. Scientists shudder to realize that if just one of the 26 dials forming this existence were accidentally turned off by a billionth of a fraction, the entire magnificent tapestry of the vast cosmos would instantly vanish into nothingness. If the strong nuclear force were slightly weaker, atomic blocks could never bind together, resulting in no formation of the grand carbon particles whatsoever, no miraculous chemical reactions to nourish cells, no blazing stars warming the primordial night, and of course, there would be not a single tiny sprout of life given the chance to stir and bloom in an utterly barren and freezing cold universe. This undeniable miraculous randomness has ruthlessly knocked down all the arrogant pride of empirical science, pushing the greatest minds into a dead end of reason full of despair. This reality is exactly like walking up to a massive safe with 26 layers of complex codes, and realizing with horror that all the dials and bearings were turned by someone to the exact right positions, matching down to the micrometer from the very moment the blinding primordial explosion had just begun burning the universe. There was no visible hand or mechanical engineer present to carefully turn each of those numbers, nor was any meticulous blueprint found hidden among the nebulae, yet everything was sharply and spectacularly set up like the most absurd miracle, just to ensure that right at this very moment, we can sit peacefully here, take a sip of tea, breathe in this oxygen-filled air and look up at the sky to raise skeptical questions about our own distant origins. The magic of these 26 constants is not merely a tough physics puzzle waiting to be solved with pages covered in formulas, but it is a wordless symphony soothing our sense of hearing, quietly mocking the desperate attempts of the human mind which always wants to use logical thinking to lock the great creation into a narrow cage of control. Facing an anonymous yet ruthlessly precise miracle like this, modern man, who has always prided himself on the ability to analyze and measure, suddenly finds himself incredibly small but simultaneously completely embraced in a vast, invisible embrace. The mystery of this random yet supremely perfect existence taps a rhythm into our anxiety-ridden souls, opening up an overwhelming space that forces shallow analytical intellect to obediently surrender to the wondrous beauty of a creator that knew how to pave the way for life right from within the darkest depths of the freezing void. From the utter astonishment at the 26 physical constants, automatically arranged perfectly in the endless expanse of space, we cannot help but smile bitterly as we look back at the way the human mind desperately operates in this cramped earthly life. Although we have just witnessed a mighty universe more than capable of fine-tuning the vital principles of reality on its own without ever needing an anxious frown or a control plan from humanity, we stubbornly cling to the illusion of craving the manipulation of all things. Modern man is groaning under the burden of a chronic psychological disease of wanting to master all variables, deluding himself into believing that he is a solitary captain having to grip the steering wheel through the storms of fate. The deep-rooted source of the chest-tightening anxieties does not stem from actual external threats, but it sprouts from an incredibly delusional and toxic belief that if we let our guard down for just 1 second, if we stop calculating and stop worrying for even the blink of an eye, our entire system of existence will instantly crash into the abyss. We use worry as a kind of protective charm, mistakenly believing that exhausting our strength tossing and turning all night, continuously building worst-case backup scenarios will actually change the trajectory of tomorrow. This action is identical to a passenger sitting on an airplane but tightly gripping the armrests with every tense muscle, naively believing that his sweat-drenched straining is what keeps that massive block of metal hovering in the sky rather than the lift of aerodynamics. But alas, that small, trembling ego fails to recognize its own ridiculous futility. Let the profound philosophy of Wu Wei from Eastern Taoism gently peel away that proud and fearful outer shell, offering you a cooling dose of first aid right in the epicenter of the panic. Wu Wei never means passive laziness or throwing your hands up and ignoring the world as many mistakenly believe, but it is the pinnacle of absolute clarity, the art of loosening your grip on the steering wheel when you suddenly awaken to the fact that, from the very beginning, you were never truly the one driving. Right at this moment as you sit here, shrinking back because of the terrible scenarios spun by your own mind, a massive miracle of life is still ceaselessly flowing within and around you. Close your eyes and feel it. Billions of cells in your body are rhythmically dividing. Your heart is steadily pumping thousands of liters of blood to nourish every muscle fiber. Your lungs are automatically inflating and deflating to smoothly extract life-giving oxygen. Step outside, the giant globe is still calmly rotating on its axis, the sap of life is still silently traveling up ancient tree trunks, and tens of thousands of planetary systems are still maintaining their exquisite orbits in the heart of the galaxy. The entire machinery of physiology inside your body and the vast stellar structures out there are operating smoothly, completely, and full of vitality without absolutely needing you to bother sending out a single conscious command. You do not need to stick notes to remind your heart to beat, nor do you need to create data analysis tables to order your digestive system to work. If the magic of nature can already manage such an enormous and intricate workload on its own, why must you torture yourself with paranoid delusions, panicking to hoard the keys to every worldly variable in your narrow pockets? The magic of reality lies in the fact that it always knows how to take care of itself without needing the stressful intervention of the intellect. The only antidote to bring the soul back to serene peace is to bravely surrender to that great flow. Understand that your giving up the need to manipulate everything around you does not lead to collapse or chaos, but on the contrary, it is the moment you truly clear away the obstacles created by your own thinking to allow the profound wisdom of the universe to step in and do its part. Breathe a sigh of relief, loosen your hands that are cramped and broken from trying to hold on to the illusion of safety, and allow yourself to melt into the wonderful stillness of surrender, where you drift freely along the river of your life like a peaceful leaf dancing on the water without bothering to interrogate the current about where it is heading. Just as the mind manages to let go of the steering wheel to enjoy the miracle of the 26 constants forging life, another coldly sharp question tears through that peaceful night, pushing us into a fathomless dimension of the infinite realm. If the universe has been so intricately programmed for life to blossom and prosper, if cutting-edge observational instruments like the James Webb Space Telescope are sending back endless evidence day and night showing that the sky is scattered with billions of water-bearing planets with tempered atmospheres, then why, up to this very moment, does that immense cosmic expanse remain utterly silent? This deafening silence is not a harmless void, but it is the chilling embodiment of the famous Fermi paradox. Imagine stepping into a gigantic greenhouse where the soil is fertile, the temperature is perfect, and seeds are scattered everywhere, yet absolutely not a single branch of grass grows to greet the light. That emptiness immediately becomes incredibly terrifying and suffocating. Astronomers no longer view the silence of the stars as merely an interesting academic puzzle. Instead, they begin to tremble when confronting the hypothesis of a great filter. That filter is envisioned as an invisible barrier, a cruel life-or-death test of creation that any civilization must face on the path of evolution. The total absence of radio signals, not a single greeting tearing through the vacuum, not a remnant of a megastructure blocking the light of galaxies, all are silently echoing a sharp message that perhaps life is not scarce at all, but simply that surviving past the stage of maturity is an almost impossible feat. The most haunting question bearing down on human intellect now no longer lies in whether we are alone or not, but whether that cruel great filter is drifting behind us in the dark past of biological evolution, or if it is still coldly waiting for us just ahead on the road of history. If millions of civilizations out there once proudly existed but could not overcome the dead end of greed, of weapons of mass destruction, or irreversible ecological collapse, then the silent void we look up to every night is actually a massive mass grave concealing the doom of countless ignorant species. The telescope machine once expected to bring back bustling responses from distant civilizations has now morphed into a giant mirror reflecting humanity's most primal fear. The silence of the stellar realm suspended above our heads is no longer an empty space to be filled by scientific curiosity, but it feels like a horrifying warning about the incredibly fragile future of all things. It is like we are eagerly running the first miles of a great marathon, turning back to see thousands of people starting with us, but looking forward toward the finish line. There is not a single soul waving to welcome us. The pressure of this silence forces the mind to face utter meaninglessness, making trivial daily worries suddenly seem pitifully small against the prospect of a silent end that could strike at any moment, ready to extinguish every brilliant echo of human civilization and bury everything in the deepest, answerless darkness. That the overwhelming silence of the stellar realm not only strikes a psychological blow to astronomers but also echoes a freezing resonance into the profound emptiness within the soul of modern man. The fear of a macroscopic loneliness amidst the vast cosmos is really just the perfect magnifying glass for the microscopic loneliness we endure every day. We live in overcrowded megacities, swimming in an endless, noisy ocean of information, yet we frequently find ourselves bewildered, lost, and isolated to the point of suffocation. Existential crisis strikes when we look up at the echoless night sky and look back at our own lives without seeing any absolute meaning echoed in return. Sometimes the silence of life, the moments when we earnestly pray in the dead of night, when we strive to the point of exhaustion until our last drop of sweat falls but receive no acknowledging signal or understanding from the world around us, plunges us into a state of extreme panic. We are already molded and programmed by society to dogmatically believe that silence always equals rejection, that a soundless void is undoubtedly a cold, dead land unworthy of living in. But from the non-dualistic perspective of meditation, equating stillness with cruel death is an incredibly harmful misunderstanding by an intellect that constantly craves noise. Let the profound wisdom of Eastern philosophy gently soothe your consciousness through the concept of tranquil empty space, where the absolute void is never an absence or poverty, but is precisely the core element that shelters and gives meaning to all tangible things. A clay bowl is only truly useful and fulfills its duty thanks to the empty space embraced within its hollow. A room only offers life because of the empty space for humans to breathe, and a renowned symphony can only touch the very root of the heart thanks to the delicate silent pauses interspersed among the stirring, fluctuating notes. Similarly, the great silence of the vast universe out there is not a dark tomb burying ill-fated civilizations, but it is in truth the most pristine and boundless blank canvas that creation has kindly stretched out for you to freely paint your own meanings upon. Do not let your panicked mind deceive you and fill that pure void with gloomy visions of doom or tragic scenarios directed by fear itself. Actively transform the long-hidden fear of eternal loneliness into a profoundly deep, meditative aesthetic experience. The most miraculous first aid for a mind that is exhausted from overthinking, that is bleeding from worldly yardsticks, is the courage to allow oneself to melt entirely into that boundless stillness. Silence is not a deadly void threatening to swallow your life force. Silence is actually the most soothing sanctuary, the peaceful haven where your tired mind is finally granted the privilege to rest from the screaming judgments of concepts, from harsh expectations and noisy, binding prejudices. When you surrender the craving to control, stop demanding the vast universe or the people around you to continuously speak up to prove your existence, when you generously open your arms to embrace the great silence into your heart, you will be astounded to realize an earth-shattering truth. That true peace does not reside in resounding cheers or clear-cut answers, but it always blossoms right here, tranquil, majestic, and unshakable amidst the myriad storms of illusory thoughts. Just as we manage to find peaceful refuge inside the still void of the cosmic realm, quantum physics once again strikes the mind with a blow of extreme awakening, overturning all the most fundamental concepts we ever knew about what we call space. For thousands of years, humanity has always been firmly convinced that space is a giant box, a magnificent foundational stage, where all things from tiny dust particles to supergalaxies are arranged and perform. We believe that if we dragged all the stars, planets, and matter out of that box, what remains will be a smooth void, empty but still existing independently. However, a terrifying shock named the holographic principle and the theory of equivalence has ruthlessly ripped apart that illusory stage. Top theoretical physicists have proven with cold, sharp equations that space and time are absolutely not the core bricks building reality. They are merely gorgeous hallucinations, secondary consequences, arising from a much more subtle magic known as quantum entanglement. Let us try to imagine an insane but supremely enlightening thought experiment, where two quantum systems are placed in a state of maximum connection. This invisible link is what weaves what we call geometric distance, creating a spatial bridge connecting the 2 points. But the most terrifying and magnificent thing happens when they begin to gradually reduce and completely cut off that linking cord. When entanglement drops to zero, the two regions are not simply pushed thousands of miles apart, but the empty space lying between them also instantly evaporates and completely disappears. Removing the connection does not create a void, it annihilates the very concept of separation. Think of two people who were once bound by flesh and blood, sharing every breath with each other throughout their lives. When all communication and empathy are severed forever, the relationship does not become empty, but it truly ceases to exist, and what remains is only two completely strange individuals who never shared common ground. Our universe also operates in an exactly similarly wondrous and harsh manner. The vast space you are sitting in and breathing right now, the millions of light years of distance separating the Earth from distant galaxies, all are not a container holding all things, but the magnificent consequence of countless, intricately woven quantum relationships. This carries a philosophical meaning so profound that it can heal every solitary wound of life. The human mind often complains about separation, about the long geographical miles cutting us off from those we love, or shudders before the seemingly endless distance between this small planet and the pitch-black space out there. But the bright and righteous truth that physics has just revealed tells an entirely different story. Space is not the thing that separates all things, it is the proof of connection. If there had been no primordial quantum entanglement deep from the moment the universe first took shape, then that void would have never had the chance to exist to serve as a grand black velvet curtain. You do not walk upon a senseless, lifeless stage, you are diving deep in an ocean of intricately intertwined connections that cannot be torn apart. Every distance that your worldly lens can measure, from the gap of a few centimeters between the two heartbeats of a pair of lovers, to the bottomless abyss of the vast stellar realms, is actually just exquisite mirages woven by the thread of entanglement. Upon fully grasping this, the fear of spatial separation instantly vanishes like a water bubble. We realize that cutting the cord of connection does not give us more space, it only robs us of the background frame of reality, causing everything to evaporate into nothingness. This realization invites an ultimate humility and a brilliant joy, for it strips away the greatest excuse for isolation. No single atom can crown itself a lonely oasis in this world, because even the distance needed to create that loneliness is only a secondary consequence of the fact that we have always belonged to each other in a grand, interwoven whole since before the concepts of length, width, or depth could even be born. The magnificent collapse of the concept of physical space not only tears apart the velvet curtain of the astronomical realm but also directly opens a radiant door leading straight to the center of non-dualistic philosophy, an ancient wisdom that was once buried under the noisy dust of modern civilization. Human society, along with the linear analytical language we use every day, has continuously fragmented a complete reality into countless disjointed, shattered pieces. From the moment we cry upon coming into the world, we are stuffed with a toxic hallucination that each individual is an independent entity, a lonely island tossed into a hostile and alien world. Dualistic thinking forces the mind to continuously draw sharp boundaries to clearly distinguish between the self and others, between the fragile soul inside and the harsh circumstances outside, between the tiny human and the vast universe. It is precisely from this cracked lens that all the profound exhaustion of humanity begins to sprout and root deeply into the subconscious. Try to imagine the horrifying weariness of a drop of water that stubbornly claims dominance, isolating itself from the shelter of the sea and arrogantly believing that it must brace itself to fight against the power of an entire ocean surging with fierce waves. The chronic anxiety, the disease of overthinking, or the emptiness that squeezes the modern human chest day and night, is ultimately nothing other than the inevitable consequence of that arrogant, yet deeply tragic illusion, the illusion of a lonely ego forced to strain itself to resist the weight of the entire surrounding world. But now, as the spearhead of quantum physics has awakened us with clear proof that the invisible bond is truly the ultimate foundation of creation, and spatial separation is merely a faint optical illusion born from entanglement, the most purifying first aid for your fractured soul has fully materialized. Right at this moment, you are invited to undertake the deepest self-inquiry, to bravely throw away the distorted and narrow definition of your own existence. When the storm of depression or existential panic rises, trying to convince you to believe the lying story that you are just a helpless outsider, a meaningless speck of dust blown away in the tornado of time, calmly remember the profound truth deep from those quantum physics equations. You are absolutely not an uninvited guest, nor will you ever be a life form barely surviving inside the belly of the universe like a prisoner held within four suffocating walls. The division of boundaries between your flesh and the air outside is merely a convenience of the process of biological evolution, and absolutely not the core essence of reality. Let this tranquil truth seep deeply into every cell and every vein of yours, soothing all muscle tension, that you yourself are the great universe wearing the form of a human of flesh and blood for a sacred, fleeting moment in the realm of time. The entire vast expanse out there, including the exquisite physical constants, the wandering galaxies, and the still vacuums, is borrowing your clear eyes to gaze upon its own gorgeous beauty. Creation is borrowing your ears to listen to the silent symphony of life, borrowing your hands to touch the softness of morning petals, and borrowing your throbbing heartbeat to fully experience every gamut of joy, anger, love, and hate in life. You are not an individual drifting aimlessly waiting for death to strike, but you are a ceaselessly blooming process of the entire galactic realm. When the dark shadow of isolation is incinerated by the brilliant light of non-dualistic philosophy, the exhaustion will instantly vanish, returning to you a feeling of supreme liberation and a profound joy, for you have permanently realized that not for a single moment have you had to fight alone, and you will forever belong to this magnificently radiant whole even when this fleshy vessel dissolves into eternity. As consciousness sheds the burden of separation to immerse itself in the great whole, let us return together to the quiet room where the veteran Professor Arthur Pendelton and the young researcher Sarah Jenkins are facing the dead end of human knowledge. After countless sleepless nights wrestling with the unruly data, from the ancient galaxies appearing at the wrong time to the cosmic constant drifting aimlessly, a faint ray of light finally begins to shine through the thick fog of paradoxes. Both Arthur, carrying the weight of glorious, prestigious awards, and Sarah, carrying the fiery passion of youth, are stunned to realize that all those heart-wrenching contradictions actually converge on a single blind spot. All the astoundingly perfect laws of physics that humanity once worshipped, the sharp equations once honored with the most brilliant intellectual glories, turned out not to possess the absolute universality covering the entire universe as we had always deluded ourselves. This discovery strikes a fatal blow to worldly pride, forcing analytical thinking to bow its head and admit that the brilliant system of truth humanity took so much effort to build all this time is actually just an incredibly small set of local laws. Imagine that our entire observable space, with its massive diameter stretching over tens of billions of light-years, is ultimately just a fragile soap bubble drifting inside a tiny spatial bubble belonging to an invisible, boiling ocean of the multiverse. The exquisite constants, the seeds spawning life that we once considered the hand of the Creator, turned out to be merely specific ecological conditions randomly fine-tuned solely for this cramped little bubble. Every measurement, every mathematical simulation up to now has been entirely accurate, but they are only absolutely accurate in our local vicinity. It is exactly like a mapmaker who devoted his entire lifetime to meticulously surveying every coral reef, every hill for a pristine continent, only to one day be stunned by an aerial photograph exposing the truth that the land is just a bare island amidst countless vast, stormy oceans. The entire knowledge of that talented craftsman was not wrong by even a single brushstroke, but it can never be used to explain what is surging out in the distant open sea. For cosmology, abandoning the desire to find an absolute theory of everything in order to accept this local map is an incredibly painful, yet life-or-death necessary concession. It perfectly explains why the state-of-the-art time machine sees a reality at odds with the theoretical model. Because we conceitedly took the measuring rules from inside the village pond to impose them upon a reality lying outside the bounds of comprehension. When Arthur Pendelton uttered the choked confession that this is not our universe, he was not declaring an end to science, but in truth, he was personally opening a new frontier of utmost humility. The grand universe resolutely refused to be imprisoned in humanity's omnipotent formulas. It gently brushed aside the glass cage of formulaic theory to prove that vast reality is always thousands of times grander, wilder, and richer than the finite imagination of the biological brain. Realizing that one's map is merely a tiny local puzzle piece does not negate the value of existence, but rather, it invites us to step into a much deeper state of contemplation. True inner tranquility blossoms when we learn to appreciate the dim light of knowledge within our safe cocoon without panicking anymore, no longer desperately demanding to control the immense dark expanse of things that will forever remain unknowable. From the profound awakening shining through the fog of the vast multiverse, where all grand laws are ultimately just a tiny local map, we realize a brilliant and supremely liberating humanistic lesson for human life. Throughout this journey we have unpeeled the root of all earthly suffering together, and it turns out it always stems from the stubborn craving of the mind wanting to find an absolute, flawless universal answer to apply to every aspect of life. But even the most erudite empirical science with its most sophisticated telescope machines must humbly smile and admit that we can never fully map the endless ocean. Trying to force the ever-flowing, impermanent life to follow a perfect script pre-written by ourselves is like bringing a tape measure to measure eternity. Therefore, the final and most soothing dose of first aid for your weary soul is precisely the art of living fully with truths that are simply enough. You absolutely have the right to throw away the suffocating pressure of having to find an absolute meaning of human proportion, because the rules you are using to live by, or your definitions of success and happiness, are all just local laws established exclusively for your current, tranquil space. You do not need to thoroughly understand all the murky secrets of the cosmic ocean out there in order to peacefully swim and enjoy the refreshing coolness in your own familiar little puddle. Allow yourself to smile in relief at temporary impasses, because ultimately, when the veteran professor uttered the confession that this is not our universe, it was not a death sentence, but in fact, the most soothing liberation humanity has ever received, freeing us from the heavy responsibility of shouldering every strict law, allowing the soul to freely dance with the magical uncertainty of creation. Dear friends, precious companions on the path to seeking inner peace, if today's journey of breaking the boundaries of the mind has touched a certain beat within you, then please take a brief moment to hit the subscribe button for our channel, and also like and share so we can spread the word together and listen to many more captivating videos every day. We genuinely yearn to know how the audience feels about this story and how to relate those non-dualistic philosophical lessons to the very struggles in your real lives, so we eagerly await the audience to share comments to let us hear the feelings from deep within the audience's hearts. Sending the best wishes to everyone watching this video, wishing you always good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days. Goodbye and see you again in the next video.